The Grand Chamber of the Galactic Council was the largest room ever built by any living species. It stretched upward like the inside of a hollow mountain, with thousands of seats carved into the curved walls, each one filled by a delegate from a different world. The air smelled like metal and something sweet that Hana could not name. She stood in the center of it all, barefoot on a cold glass floor, with her hands bound in front of her by a ring of blue light. She was 19 years old. She was small, even by human standards. Her dark hair was cut short and uneven because she had done it herself with medical scissors 3 weeks ago. She wore a gray detention suit that was too big for her, and her feet were bare because they had taken her shoes. She did not know why they had taken her shoes. Maybe they thought she would run. There was nowhere to run. Above her, on a raised platform wrapped in silver metal, Council Premier Vorath stood behind a podium that was shaped like an open hand. He was tall, taller than any human, with a body covered in dark plates like the shell of a beetle. His eyes were black and wet, and they reflected the light of the chamber like 2 drops of oil. When he spoke, his voice filled every corner of the room, carried by hidden speakers that made it sound like the voice of the room itself. The human called Hana, Vorath said, is charged with biological interference on the neutral world of Ogen. She entered a restricted zone without authorization. She made physical contact with wounded insurgents. She administered human medical techniques to alien bodies without approval from any galactic medical authority. She acted alone. She acted without permission. She acted as if the laws of this council did not apply to her. Hana listened. She had heard all of this before, in the small gray room where they had kept her for 11 days. She had explained, many times, that the people she helped were dying, that she was trained as a medic, that she could not walk past dying people and do nothing. They had written her words down and never responded to them. Vorath continued. He spoke about humans the way someone might speak about a storm, something dangerous and mindless that needed to be controlled. He said that humanity had been given a place in the galactic community out of generosity, and that this generosity had been repaid with arrogance. He said that Hana's actions were not the actions of one girl, but a symptom of a species that did not understand its place. The delegates listened. Some nodded. Some looked uncomfortable. Most simply watched, the way one watches something that has already been decided. And it had been decided. When the vote was called, 11 delegates raised their approval. Only one voted against. Her name was Mirith, a reptilian delegate with deep green scales and tired eyes. She called the sentence barbaric. Vorath thanked her for her opinion and moved on. The sentence was death, public execution, to be broadcast live across the galactic network to over 4,000 worlds. It would take place in 30 minutes, right here in this chamber, so that every species in the galaxy could see what happened when a human broke the law. Hana stood very still when they announced it. She did not cry. She did not scream. She did not beg. The alien guards near her shifted slightly, as if they had been ready for her to collapse. She did not collapse. She breathed in slowly through her nose, and she looked up at the broadcast lens, a small glowing circle mounted high on the chamber wall, and she spoke. Her voice was quiet and steady, and it carried through the silence of the chamber like a stone dropping into still water. The translation systems did not pick it up. The alien delegates looked at each other in confusion. Vorath frowned but did not ask for a translation. It did not matter to him. In 30 minutes she would be dead, and whatever she said would be forgotten. But the broadcast had already carried her voice to every human watching. 6,000 light-years away, on a place called Earth's Outer Ring, a woman named Yuna was sitting in a relay hub, a small, cluttered room full of screens and wires and the hum of old machines. She was 26 years old, thin and sharp-faced, with the same dark eyes as Hana. She was Hana's older sister. Yuna had been eating lunch when the broadcast started. She had turned it on out of habit because she always monitored council feeds for calm traffic patterns. When she saw Hana standing in that chamber, barefoot and small, and surrounded by aliens who had decided she should die, Yuna dropped her coffee. The cup hit the floor and broke into 3 pieces, and the brown liquid spread across the concrete. But she did not look down. She watched the screen. She watched her little sister speak in Korean to a galaxy that did not understand her. And something in Yuna's chest turned to iron. Her hands were shaking when she reached for the console. She opened a comm channel that she was not supposed to know about, a frequency that belonged to an old military network from the colonial wars, a network that the council believed had been shut down 15 years ago. It had not been shut down. It had only gone quiet. Yuna typed a message, 3 words in old military code. Simple words, words that any human who had lived through the wars would understand immediately. She sent the message. The signal left her console and traveled through a hidden relay, then another, skipping across dead satellites and buried transmitters that had been waiting in silence for years. The signal moved at the speed of light, then faster, bouncing through fold points and jump corridors, reaching further and further into the dark. Yuna sat back in her chair. Her hands were still shaking. She looked at the screen where her sister stood in a circle of blue light, and she whispered, "Hold on." The message she had sent was already racing through the galaxy, touching every hidden relay, every sleeping receiver, every human ear that was listening on the old frequency. 3 words. That was all it took. The signal moved like fire through dry grass. It passed through hidden relays buried in dead moons and abandoned stations, through transmitters welded to the undersides of asteroids, through comm arrays disguised as broken satellites floating in the dark between stars. The network had been built during the colonial wars, when humanity was fighting for the right to exist in a galaxy that did not want them. The Council had ordered it destroyed. Humanity had said yes, and then done nothing of the sort. On the border station called Carrick 9, a man named Tejo was sitting alone in a small room, with gray walls and a single window that looked out at nothing. He was 53 years old. His hair was more gray than black now. There was a scar that ran from his left ear to the corner of his mouth, a gift from a battle he no longer talked about. He had been a fleet commander once. The humans who remembered the wars called him the Ghost of Ryong Sector, because his ships would appear from nowhere, strike, and vanish before the enemy could respond. That was a long time ago. Now he lived in this room, on this forgotten station, and he drank tea, and read old books, and tried not to remember. The signal reached his console at 6 minutes past the broadcast. He read the 3 words. He sat very still for 11 seconds. In those 11 seconds, something changed in his face. The tiredness left his eyes. The softness in his shoulders disappeared. He stood up. And the man who stood was not the man who had been sitting. He was someone older, someone harder, someone the galaxy had been foolish to forget. He knelt beside his bed and pulled out a locked case from underneath. Inside was a command sigil, a small black disk with a silver circle etched into its surface. It was old technology, from the war. When activated, it would send a verified identity signal to every human military-grade receiver within range. It said simply that the person holding it had the authority to give orders, and that those orders were to be followed. Tejo pressed his thumb against the disk. It lit up with a faint white glow. Then he called Dong-su. Dong-su was on the other side of the galaxy, on a trading post called Maru, in the middle of a deal that involved stolen engine parts and a species that communicated through color changes in their skin. He was 38, broad-shouldered, loud when he wanted to be, and invisible when he needed to be. He was a smuggler, an information broker, and a man who knew things about the galaxy's systems that the systems themselves did not know. When Taeho's voice came through his earpiece, Dong-su stopped talking mid-sentence. The alien traders stared at him. He looked at them, said deals off, and walked out of the room without another word. They called after him. He did not turn around. In a corridor behind the trading floor, Dong-su pressed his back against the wall and listened. Taeho's voice was calm and flat, the way it always was when things were serious. He needed 3 things. First, the current position and patrol routes of every council ship within 2 jumps of Ilmara. Second, the blind spots in Ilmara's defense grid. Third, everything Dong-su could find about the station's internal layout, especially the Grand Chamber and its security systems. Dong-su closed his eyes for 2 seconds. Then he opened them and started making calls. He had contacts on 11 worlds and owed favors on 6 more. Within 4 minutes, data began flowing to Taeho's console like water from a broken pipe. Far away, in an asteroid belt that had no name on any official map, the stealth cruiser Baekho floated in the dark like a sleeping animal. It was not a large ship. It was built for silence, not strength. Its hull was coated in material that absorbed sensor signals, and its engines, when running, produced almost no heat signature. It had been parked here for 2 years, officially decommissioned, unofficially waiting. Su-bin was the only person aboard. She was 24, thin, with quick hands and quicker eyes. She was a signals officer, and she had stayed with the Baekho because someone had to, and because she believed that someday the old codes would light up again. Today, they did. The combat systems activated on their own, one by one, like lights turning on in an empty house. Su-bin stared at her console as lines of code scrolled across the screen. Activation sequences she had only ever seen in training simulations. She traced the signal back and found Taeho's sigil code. Her breath caught in her throat. She knew that name. Everyone knew that name. Her hands were trembling when she began the startup sequence. The engines hummed to life. The weapon systems powered up. The Baekho was awake. On Ilmara, they had moved Hana to a preparation cell. It was a small room with white walls and a single light that did not flicker. A council medic, a tall creature with 4 arms and a face like melted wax, entered and offered her a sedative. It would make the execution painless, the medic said. Hana looked at the medic and said, no. The medic seemed confused. Hana asked for water and a cloth to clean her face. The medic brought both and stood in the doorway, watching her. The guards outside exchanged glances. They had been told that humans begged, that humans fell apart when they were afraid. This girl was washing her face. Across the galaxy, ships were moving. Not warships, freighters loaded with cargo, mining rigs halfway through shifts, passenger transports on routine routes, civilian vessels of every size and shape, crewed by humans who had been going about their ordinary lives until a signal reached them on a frequency they were never supposed to hear. One by one, they changed course. No announcements were made. No explanations were given to the alien crew members who asked why they were turning. The humans simply said, we have to go, and turned their ships toward Ilmara. Taeho recorded a message. He did not write it down first. He did not rehearse it. He opened a wideband channel on the old human frequency and spoke. This is Taeho of Rion. All debts are called. All oaths are held. You have 23 minutes. Then he closed the channel and began studying the layout of the Grand Chamber. The execution platform was beautiful. That was the worst part of it. It had been built quickly, but with care. A raised circle of polished white stone in the center of the Grand Chamber, surrounded by thin columns of light that hummed softly like a song. An automated energy array was mounted above it, a weapon that could reduce a body to nothing in less than a second. It was clean, it was elegant, It was designed to kill a 19-year-old girl in front of trillions of viewers, and someone had made sure it looked nice. Council Premier Vorath stood at his podium and reviewed the schedule. Everything was on time. The broadcast audience had grown beyond projections. Over 3 trillion beings across 4,000 worlds were watching. Vorath allowed himself a moment of satisfaction. This would be remembered. This would be the moment the galaxy understood that the Council's authority was absolute, and that humanity's habit of acting without permission had consequences. A junior officer approached his platform and spoke quietly. There were sensor anomalies at the edge of the system. Ships were arriving, human ships. Vorath looked down at the officer. How many? 47 so far, Premier. Civilian vessels, freighters, transports, mining ships. They come to watch their kind die, Vorath said. Let them. It will make the lesson sharper. He turned back to his schedule. The officer hesitated, then left. But the ships kept coming. 47 became 100. 100 became 200. They dropped out of faster-than-light travel at the system's edge and burned toward Ilmara on sublight engines. Not fast, not slow, steady and deliberate. They did not respond to hails from Council Traffic Control. They did not file approach vectors. They simply came. Behind the noise of those civilian ships, hidden in the sensor confusion they created, 3 shapes moved through the dark. The Beko was one of them. 2 other stealth cruisers, pulled from hidden docks across the sector, flew in formation beside it. Their hulls swallowed every signal that touched them. To the Council's sensors, they did not exist. Subin sat at her console aboard the Beko, watching the numbers climb on her screen. She could see the positions of all 3 stealth cruisers, marked by tiny blue dots against the black. She could see the swarm of civilian ships spreading out like a hand reaching forward. And she could see Ilmara ahead of them, the station world shining with lights from 1,000 windows, unaware of what was coming. She was terrified. Her stomach was tight and her mouth was dry, and her fingers kept missing the keys. The Beko had not been in combat for years. She had never been in combat at all. She was a signals officer who had spent the last 2 years alone on a sleeping ship, running diagnostics and talking to herself. Now the ship was awake and armed, and heading toward the most heavily guarded station in the galaxy, and she was the one flying it. She whispered an old prayer her grandmother had taught her, and she kept her hands on the controls. On Ilmara, they came for Hana. 2 guards opened her cell and told her it was time. She stood up from the small bench where she had been sitting. Her face was clean. Her hair was pushed back from her forehead. She looked for a moment like someone getting ready for an ordinary day, not someone walking to her death. They led her through corridors of pale gray metal, past windows that showed the blackness of space outside. She walked without help. The guards were large, armed with weapons that could have stopped a charging animal, and they walked on either side of a barefoot girl who barely reached their shoulders. If they felt anything about this, they did not show it. The grand chamber swallowed her when she entered. The noise of thousands of alien voices hit her like a wave of sound, then died away as she walked toward the platform. Every eye in the room turned to her. Every lens on every camera found her face. She was so small against the vastness of that room. A tiny figure in gray, walking across a floor that reflected the lights above like a frozen lake. Delegate Mirith was waiting near the base of the platform. She was not supposed to be there. She had left her seat and come down to the floor, and no one had stopped her because no one had expected it. She stepped in front of Hana and spoke quietly, so that only the girl could hear. Her voice was rough, like stones grinding together. Hana looked up at her. The reptilian delegate towered over her, green-scaled and ancient-looking, with eyes that were yellow and deep. Hana said, "I know. Thank you." Mireth blinked. She had expected anger, or tears, or silence. She had not expected gratitude. She stepped aside, and Hana walked past her and up the steps of the platform. Outside, the ship count passed 1,000. Council officers were no longer calm. Reports were coming in every few seconds. The human ships were not stopping. They were not armed, or at least not visibly armed, but they were forming a dense cloud around Ilmara that was making it difficult to track anything clearly. Calls for military reinforcement were sent to Vorath. He read them and shook his head. Calling in warships would make the council look afraid. He would not show fear of freighters and mining ships. This was his mistake. Tejo was already in the system. He stood on the bridge of a stealth cruiser called the Hala, studying a screen that showed the interior of the Grand Chamber in real time. Dongsu had found him a feed from a maintenance camera that the council had forgotten existed. He could see the platform. He could see the weapon above it. He could see Hana standing there, small and still, and waiting. He looked at the clock. 3 minutes. He opened a channel to all human ships. His voice was quiet and even, the voice of a man who had done impossible things before and saw no reason to be loud about it. We go in 3 minutes. No one fires first, but no one stops. On the Baiko, Subin heard the order and tightened her grip on the controls. On a fast courier ship burning toward Ilmara at dangerous speed, Yuna pressed her forehead against the window and stared at the growing light of the station world ahead. On Maru, Dongsu watched his screens and held his breath. And in the Grand Chamber, Vorath approached his podium to begin the final speech, unaware that behind the wall of civilian ships, 3 ghosts were moving into position. Vorath's voice filled the Grand Chamber like the sound of a closing door. He spoke about order. He spoke about law. He spoke about the necessity of consequence, about how civilizations were not built on kindness, but on discipline. He spoke about humanity the way one speaks about a disease that must be cured before it spreads. And 3 trillion beings across the galaxy listened, because the Council's broadcast was on every screen, in every home, on every ship and station and colony world that had a connection to the galactic network. Hana stood on the platform above him. The white stone was cold under her bare feet. The automated weapon hummed above her head, a soft and steady sound, like a machine breathing. She could feel the heat from the energy array on the top of her scalp. She did not look up at it. She looked out at the chamber, at the thousands of alien faces staring down at her from the tiered seats. She thought about the morning Yuna had braided her hair before school, years ago on a colony world that smelled like rain and engine oil. She thought about the children she had treated on Ojen, their strange faces twisted with pain, reaching for their hands because she was the only one who came. She was afraid. Of course she was afraid, but the fear was behind something else. Something solid and warm that sat in her chest like a second heartbeat. She had done the right thing. She knew it the way she knew her own name, and knowing that made the fear smaller. Vorath reached the end of his speech. He raised one of his dark, plated arms and said, "Let this be remembered." The execution clock showed 24 minutes. Every screen went dark. It happened at the same instant, on Ilmara, and on every world and station and ship that was receiving the broadcast. 3 trillion screens blinked to black. For 3 seconds, there was nothing. On Ilmara, the Grand Chamber's internal displays went dead. The delegates murmured. Officers grabbed at their consoles. Vorath froze at his podium, his arms still raised. Then the screens came back, and Tejo's face filled every one of them. He was older than the images the council had in their records. His hair was gray, and his scar was a white line across his face. He sat in a simple chair on what looked like the bridge of a ship, and the light behind him was dim and blue. His eyes were dark and steady and completely calm, the eyes of a man who had already decided what was going to happen and was no longer in a hurry. He spoke. His voice was not loud. It did not need to be. This is Commander Tejo, formerly of Earth's 7th Fleet. You are about to kill a girl whose only crime was saving lives. I want you to understand what happens next." In the Grand Chamber, Vorath turned to his officers and shouted for them to cut the signal. They could not. Dong-Su had spent the last 20 minutes threading human override codes into Ilmara's communication systems. Codes that were so old, the Council's security software did not even recognize them as threats. The broadcast belonged to Tejo now. The clock showed 25 minutes. The sky above Ilmara changed. 3 shapes appeared where there had been nothing. The Baiko and its 2 sister ships dropped their stealth fields at the same moment, and suddenly there were 3 warships hanging directly above the Grand Chamber, close enough that their hulls were visible through the station world's transparent dome. They were not large ships. They did not need to be. Their weapons were pointed downward, locked on Ilmara's defense systems, and everyone in the chamber could see them. At the same moment, the 1,400 civilian ships that had been gathering at the edges of the system lit their engines at full power. They surged forward, not in attack formation, not with weapons armed, but in a single, massive, moving wall of metal and light that surrounded Ilmara on every side. More ships were still arriving. The number passed 1,500, then 1,600. Freighters and transports and mining ships and passenger vessels and old patrol boats held together with welding wire and stubbornness, all of them burning toward the same point, all of them crewed by humans who had dropped everything and come. Council security officers screamed for shields, weapon stations powered up, targeting systems tried to lock onto the stealth cruisers, and found that the civilian ships were flooding their sensors with noise. Vorath gripped his podium and stared upward through the dome at the ships above, and for the first time in his long career, the Premier of the Galactic Council did not speak. The clock showed 26 minutes. Tejo was still on every screen. He did not make threats. He did not raise his voice. Instead, he began to list things. He listed the date when Human Colony 12 was raided, and the Council refused to investigate. He listed the names of human children who died on transport ships that the Council had reclassified as low priority. He listed the restrictions placed on human trade routes, the taxes no other species paid, the medical patents that were denied, the schools that were closed, the voices that were silenced. He spoke dates and numbers and names with the calm precision of a man reading from a record he had kept for years and years. Then he stopped listing and looked directly into the camera. "We did not come here to start a war. We came here because you are killing one of our children, and we do not allow that." On the Baiko, Subin held targeting locks on Ilmara's main weapon array. Her screens showed green. Her hands were shaking again, but her aim was steady. She did not fire. No human ship fired. But every weapon was live, and every officer on Ilmara could see it. The clock showed 27 minutes. Hana moved. She stepped forward on the platform, closer to the broadcast lens that was still transmitting her image to the galaxy. The weapon above her head hummed. She did not look at it. She looked into the lens, and she opened her mouth, and she said the same words she had spoken at the beginning, the sentence in Korean that no translator had caught. But this time, Dong-Su was in the system. He had patched a translation overlay into the broadcast feed. And as Hana spoke, her words scrolled across every screen in the galaxy, in every language, on every world. I would heal them again. The Grand Chamber went silent. Not quiet. Silent. The kind of silence that has weight. 3 trillion beings held their breath at the same moment, and for one heartbeat, the galaxy was still. Then Dong-Su's voice came through Tejo's earpiece, low and tight with something that might have been relief. The Council fleet just dropped out of approach formation, their holding position. Tejo closed his eyes for 1 second. Then he nodded. Delegate Mirith rose from where she had been standing near the platform. She walked to the center of the chamber floor, her scales catching the light, and she raised her voice for the first time in her career. "I call for an emergency vote to suspend this execution." The chamber erupted. Voices roared from every tier. Vorath slammed his podium, but Mirith stood where she was, unmoved, and the call was seconded, and then seconded again, and the noise became something else, something that sounded less like anger and more like a wall cracking. Hana stood on the platform. She was still looking into the lens. Behind her, through the dome, the sky was full of human ships, so many that they blocked out the stars. She was not a soldier. She was not a commander. She was a medic from a small colony world who had knelt beside dying strangers and held their hands. And the galaxy was watching. The vote was not close, but it was not easy. Delegates shouted from their seats. Some demanded order, some demanded blood. Vorath stood at his podium and called for silence again and again, but the chamber had slipped out of his hands, and he could not pull it back. Mirith held her ground on the chamber floor, and did not move, did not blink, did not look away from the other delegates as they argued above her. When the vote was taken, 8 voted to suspend the execution. 4 voted against. Vorath was one of the 4. He cast his vote with a voice that was steady but hollow, the voice of a man who knows the ground is moving under his feet. When the result was read, he stood for a long moment, looking down at Hana on the platform. Then he turned and walked out of the grand chamber through a side door, and he did not look back, and no one tried to stop him. The weapon above Hana powered down. The hum stopped. The columns of light around the platform flickered and went dark. Hana stood in the sudden quiet and felt the change the way you feel a storm pass, not with your ears, but with your whole body. She breathed. She breathed again. The air tasted different now. Mirith came up the steps of the platform herself. No guards, no escorts, just the old reptilian delegate with her green scales and her tired yellow eyes, climbing the steps to where a human girl stood barefoot on cold stone. She reached out one of her long, rough hands and said, "Come with me." Hana took one step forward, and her legs gave out. It happened all at once, the way a held breath finally escapes. Her knees folded, and she went down. All the strength that had been holding her upright for the last 27 minutes simply left her body, like water pouring out of a cracked glass. The delegate's arms were strong, and her grip was firm, and she held Hana against her armored chest, the way one might hold something fragile that had almost been broken. Hana did not cry. Not yet. She pressed her face into Mirith's shoulder, and she shook, her whole body trembling with the force of everything she had been keeping inside. But she did not make a sound. They brought her to a small room off the main corridor. It had a chair and a medical station, and a window that looked out at the ships still holding position around Ilmara. The sky was crowded with them, so many that the light from their engines made the station world glow from the outside like a lantern. Hana sat in the chair, and someone wrapped a blanket around her shoulders, and someone else gave her water, and she drank it slowly, with both hands around the cup, because her hands would not stop shaking. Teho arrived 40 minutes later. He came by shuttle from the Hala, landing in a docking bay that Council security had reluctantly cleared for him. He walked through the corridors of Ilmara in his old coat, a long gray thing that had seen too many years and too many worlds. He did not carry a weapon. He did not need one. The alien officers and delegates who saw him in the corridors stepped aside without being asked. There was something in the way he walked, something quiet and heavy, like the feeling before thunder. He found the room where Hana was sitting. Mirith was still with her, standing near the door like a guard. Teho looked at Mirith and gave a small nod. Mirith returned it, Then he knelt beside Hana's chair, slowly, the way old knees demand, and he looked at her face. She looked back at him with red eyes, and said, "I don't know you." He almost smiled. "You don't have to." He stayed beside her until the shaking stopped. Yuna arrived 4 hours later. She had burned through every favor, every bribe, and every ounce of charm she had, to get aboard a fast ship heading for Ilmara. She had not slept, she had not eaten. When the ship docked, she ran. She ran through corridors she did not know, past aliens who stared at her, past security checkpoints that someone had already cleared for her, and she ran until she found the room where her sister was sitting in a chair with a blanket around her shoulders. Hana looked up and saw her, and then Hana finally cried. They held each other for a long time. No one spoke. No one needed to. In the days that followed, the galaxy tried to understand what had happened. Analysts on hundreds of worlds reviewed the data and found the same thing over and over again. In less than 27 minutes, over 2,000 human ships from across the galaxy had changed course and headed for Ilmara. They had not been ordered to come. No military fleet had been activated. A retired commander had spoken on an old frequency, and people had simply come. Farmers and miners and traders and engineers, and teachers and doctors and mechanics, ordinary people living ordinary lives, had heard that a girl was going to die, and had turned their ships around. No one could explain it. The Council's intelligence division wrote reports that ran to thousands of pages, trying to map the network, trying to understand the command structure. They never found one. There was no command structure. There was only a signal, and a name, and a choice that 2,000 humans had made in the same moment for the same reason. Dong Su disappeared back into the trade routes within hours of the stand-down. Before he left, he sent Taeho a short message that said, "We're even now." Taeho read it in the small room on Ilmara, sitting in a chair across from Hana, and he smiled. It was the first time he had smiled in a long time. Su Bin stayed aboard the Baekho after the fleet dispersed. She sat alone on the bridge in the quiet, staring at her console, at the blank screens where targeting data had been glowing an hour before. Her hands were steady now. She thought about the last 2 years alone on a sleeping ship, waiting for something she had not been sure would ever come. She decided she was not going to leave. She powered down the weapons and set the ship on a slow course back to the asteroid belt. But this time, she kept the engines warm. Vorath resigned 3 weeks later. There was no public statement. He simply left Ilmara on a private transport and returned to his homeworld. The council appointed a temporary premier and began the slow, painful work of figuring out what to do about humanity. Mirith, who had never sought power or attention, found herself at the center of a growing movement within the council to reform humanity's status. The vote passed 2 months later. It was not everything. It was a start. The phrase, "I would heal them again," spread across the galaxy in the weeks that followed. It appeared on walls and screens and the hulls of ships. Other species began using it. Species that had their own reasons to feel small and unheard in the Council's vast machinery. It meant different things to different people, but at its heart, it meant the same thing to everyone. It meant that doing the right thing was not a crime, even if someone with power said it was. 6 months later, Hana was back on a medical ship, on a different border world, but the work was the same. She treated patients who came to her with wounds and sickness and fear, and she treated them all the same way, with steady hands and quiet patience, and a gentleness that did not care what species you were or what laws you had broken. One evening, a child was brought to her, an alien child, small and frightened, with a cut on its arm that was deep and needed care. The child's parents stood in the doorway of the medical bay and stared at Hana with wide eyes. The parent had seen the broadcast. The parent knew this face. Hannah knelt beside the child. She smiled, the way she always smiled at frightened children, warm and calm and sure. She took the child's small hand in hers and began to clean the wound, and the child stopped crying, because there was something in this human's touch that said everything would be all right. Outside the window the stars burned on in the dark, the same stars that had watched a girl stand barefoot on a platform and refuse to be afraid. The galaxy had spent 10,000 years building an empire on the belief that compassion was weakness. It took one human girl 27 minutes to prove them wrong.